Welcome to the Rollwise Podcast, to the weekly show that explores all things tabletop RPGs. I'm Mike, one of your hosts, and I'm joined by my fellow RPG enthusiasts, Brent and Jeff. Say hello, Brent.
Hello.
Say hello, Jeff.
Hello.
So grab your dice, settle in, and let's kick off this week's show. This week, we're going to discuss a little bit about our some games that we had since our last episode. First, we're going to discuss Pathfinder. We did happen to do a one-shot, probably the most concise one-shot I've run in quite some time, just because I tend to have a little bit of trouble reining my players in. That may or may not be some people here. And then the second update we have is that we wanted to talk about playing with a new gamer. I was inspired by what Jeff had mentioned maybe a week or two ago, and my wife actually decided to play her first tabletop RPG ever with us. And I can share a little bit about how that went, and of course we can share some tips too. So let's go ahead and dive into it. We have Pathfinder 2nd Edition. We did our first adventure. Who wants to go first as to what they liked about the system?
You know, I found Pathfinder to be, and this is probably not going to be shocking to anybody, similar enough to Dungeons and Dragons that I didn't feel lost. The system definitely has its own flavor. It definitely has its own unique rules, as we discussed. But I felt comfortable, like I had a basic understanding of the system.
Now, do you feel so? The interesting thing about it for me is that, and I think I don't know where I mentioned this, but I felt at some point after reading like the rules glossary or like the playing the game section, I felt like my cheat sheets had cheat sheets. There were definitely like, well, these are all the different conditions and everything like that. And then there's a subsection of cheat sheets that were like, these are the important ones that you're going to deal with more frequently than not. But, you know, do you feel like it was nice kind of knowing, like having like an outline of moves, maneuvers, manipulations, etc., whatever they want to call them? Or do you kind of like having that freedom to be like, oh, I can just kind of do stuff and it isn't all kind of classified?
Well, I think kind of to your point, I think there are a lot of things that are classified as what you can do. You know, there's your attack actions, your move actions, your aid actions, you know, that sort of things. But one thing that I like about a rule set like this is it doesn't hinder you from doing any of that extra stuff either. For example, in our encounter that we did, there was the moment when one of the players, the automaton we were fighting was tethered, like, and he cut the line. Like, that's not specifically, I mean, you could say it's an attack, I guess, but that's not specifically called out as something that you could do in the rules. Like, interact with object isn't in there. So one of the things I like about the system, and I remember what I liked about 3.5 and systems like it, is I feel like, and yes, it makes it complex, but I feel like there's always something you could be doing. The combats, though they can be long, they're kind of engaging because you have an idea of stuff that you can do. One of the things that I really liked, and I didn't know that Pathfinder really did, is I like the 20 for a crit or the 10 over their AC for a crit, because your characters feel like they're doing cool stuff more than if they were just not critting as often. And I thought that was cool. Well,
And I think it, you know, at least for what I was feeling, unless we got some of our rules absolutely wrong, I thought that was it added a lot more excitement to have that, because I feel like this may just be me, but I felt like the first level characters were not pushovers. I noticed that the damage was a little bit spiky, but that's because I designed two different encounters at two different levels, and I like how the encounters, they, you know, like the first encounter was actually designed more around just a moderate difficulty and everything like that. And I don't feel like it was I mean, there were definitely, you know, some like things that I need to learn about how to balance that a little bit and make sure that it makes sense. But I didn't feel like it came off as being like a hard combat, and it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to just be that first introduction to the combat system. And you guys did swimmingly. Admittedly, you all ran away because, you know, nobody was there as the kind of a tank, and so it was kind of like you were strafing against the encounter.
But that is the problem with having a party that One, you have the kind of thief that doesn't want to stand in front of things, and then 3 ranged characters.
Yeah, my armor class was 12, so I was not ever. When everybody else backed up after that first volley, if you will, I had no choice but to continue that.
Yeah. No, and it's fine. It was just a tactic that, because the composition of the party made more sense than to, kind of have your banger just get up there and stand, shield raise, bong, and all that kind of stuff. However, the second encounter was actually more of kind of like a boss fight, and it was set at the severe category, and I mean and I built this monster kind of using a template from one of the other Clockwork automatons that made sense, and it was like a high level mob, and you could tell that even with some of the modifications I did to make it more balanced, I mean, it pretty much like one shot Brent. Like I was like, whoops, bye Brent.
Yep.
And so, I mean, it was interesting to see how they, how they give you an experience budget, and the experience budget actually seemed like it wasn't, it didn't hurt me too bad. Now, I'm not going to say that means that it's like, oh, this is the perfect encounter builder, how they have it set up, because obviously I've just built 2 encounters, and there are people out there that have built thousands of encounters, and they know exactly what knobs and dials to twist to totally fuck their party over or make an encounter easier and stuff like that.
I know Brent got one shot, but one of the things that I really liked was in Pathfinder you do start with a few more hit points than you do in some other systems, and you're so squishy at level 1 that if you get into anything that's not a flock of fuzzy bunnies, you're at risk of everybody dying. And like Brent going down gave us a chance to sort of mobilize around each other and really, think about how can we finish this thing off before our, compatriot dies. And so I actually thought that worked pretty well. I mean, that character, the 2 people it clipped, it was bad. it was very bad. And it lent a sense of drama and risk that I appreciated, and I think that us having higher hit points helped accomplish that as well. So I like that about the system.
Yeah, I think one thing it did really well and was kind of typified by this scenario, and especially cool that it's a homebrew scenario and it was balanced so well, is that our characters didn't feel not powerful. They felt like decent, powerful characters at level 1, which is good for the power fantasy, which is kind of what I think you want out of a high fantasy game. And I think D&D doesn't do that sometimes, at least not for me. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I think that it did is it did still feel dangerous, which is another thing that doesn't happen sometimes in some encounters. They either feel like there's really no danger to it at all, or they feel like it's too dangerous. And I felt like this was kind of perfect for that, even though my character is the character that almost died. But the one thing I will say about that is my character did do something really cool when he backstab critted the automaton before he went down. So like that trade-off for me is, I think that's the cool type of stuff. That's the cool interactions that I look for in a game like Pathfinder. Like that's the stuff that I really feel like I need in a game to make it cool. And I know that wouldn't happen every time, but I feel like I don't have those moments in, well, I'm just going to say it. I don't feel like I had as many moments like that in 5th edition as in one game of Pathfinder.
That's interesting, because I think that it might just be the way we ran that one was, and obviously I think they're probably homebrew rules that people use to make 5e more of the game they like. But I thought it was interesting too, because, this is our first time playing Pathfinder 2nd edition. So there was a learning curve for everybody, players and game master included. And I'm happy that you guys appreciated the difficulty, and it felt cinematic in some ways. Like you were able to, it didn't feel just kind of like the, rock'em sock'em robots where you just kind of like swung until the head popped off, even though that's literally what happened in one case. But the idea is that it felt like you guys were accomplishing something and weren't just overcoming a mediocre stat block that was just, I have included encounter A, here it is. And so I think that, the one thing that was kind of was a question that I had is that when you got into it, and because the system seems to be designed so much around combat, because that seems to be a large portion of its rule sets and everything like that, and especially just coming off of the Vaesen game where combat is just, if you roll and die, that's just it could be 2 turns. Did you feel like the length of combat, and because I mean, like, time wise, the combats in Vaesen were shorter, even though they were, I think they were a little bit more boring, and they were narratively more exciting because you could kind of say whatever you needed to, but mechanically less exciting. Whereas this was mechanically more exciting, but it definitely took longer. Do you feel like that was kind of the more flavorful combat that you like, where it was a little bit more rewarding by having those extra rule sets and stuff to apply?
Well, that's kind of where I'm saying that I like, if you're going to have combat in a game, that's one of the reasons why I like the system like Pathfinder. And I think 3.5 did it a little bit too, where you feel very active. Like, you have the 3 it's not just like roll 1 dice and then wait for your turn, and roll 1 dice and wait for your turn. There's more you can do. Like, there's the multiple actions, there's the movement. And we didn't really do this, but there's like skills. Like, I know that if you have the right feats and stuff, you can use intimidation on human targets to make them be flat-footed or have an AC penalty and stuff like that. So I felt like the character was very active, where like combats in Vaesen, yes, they're shorter, but a lot of times it's, okay, I roll my dice. Okay, they roll their dice. Okay, I roll my dice. And I like I said, the feeling, and maybe this is just me, but the feeling of activity in Pathfinder is one of the things that I enjoy.
I gotcha. Yeah, that did. I can see that, and I was surprised because I know that in D&D you get like 1 combat and 1 move action and everything like that. But honestly, I really felt like the fact that you just get those 3 actions and you kind of divvy them up how you see fit. I was surprised at the versatility of it. I mean, I'm not going to say that we played it enough to, get a full feel for how it all went, but just that tiny change, that ability at first level to attack 3 times, and kind of go like all out, but see the penalties. You start off at +7, then +2, and then at -3. I mean, just even that gives you a different tactical thing than in D&D when you're your first level character and you're like, I swing my sword once because I am literally the lanky kid that has just picked up the sword for the first time and I don't know how to do it. It felt so different and so much more epic for you guys to be able to, like, I move here, I make a 5-foot step, I throw an acid vial. And it was just, I thought there was a lot it was a lot of motion, but it felt really good. I really liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a concise way to make you feel like you have options. Because you've both touched on it, and I'll probably just beat it to death. That Brent's, example, I swing my sword, I'm done. I swing my sword, I'm done. It gets redundant, especially if the combat goes on a long time. If either you're not doing enough damage fast enough, but we had options. It felt like we had options. It felt like we had options to do more damage, even though maybe we weren't. But it felt like we had the chance to. It improves the feel. Honestly, it also improves the role play. It becomes less static and more dynamic by having those additional choices that you get to make on your turn without making it feel like you're, Jackie Chan or Jet Li or somebody and you get 15 attacks, you know what I mean, and get to kill 12 guys in the first round, which is, while cinematic and fun to watch, just way too overpowered.
What I compare it to is the last fantasy game that we played, which was the D&D game you were running, where I was the gnome fighter, and basically he never hit anything at first level. Whatever, I think were we playing first level? I don't remember. But his whole goal was, like, even at 3rd level, I felt better about this character at 1st level than I did that character at 3rd level, because his whole plan was to, like, sit there, hold up his shield, and just try not to die as he, like, swung his axe or his pick like once a turn. Whereas, like, the 3 actions and the options available. It just feels better. Like my character felt more fun, and I felt like a lot of the background feats and things and making the character gave me a pretty strong idea of who the character was, even though it wasn't very roleplay heavy in this little adventure. I feel like I had a good grip on who the character was. And even in the actions that we took between the fights and during the fights, I felt like all of that stuff kind of snuck in. And I think that's kind of I don't know. I wasn't expecting to enjoy the system as much as I did in that game. And I don't know if it's because I don't know if it's just like partially nostalgia talking. I think it is, because I really remember liking 3.5, especially after I started messing with Pathfinder. So it might be partly that, but I really enjoyed it.
No, that makes perfect sense, honestly, because like the one thing that I would say, and this would probably be because if we want to switch gears and we go like, okay, well, I mean, we've gushed about it just a little bit because honestly, if you have a great first session, you're gonna like any gaming system that you play. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is, but if that first session is an absolute banger, you're going to stick with that system far longer than if you get to that first session and it's a stinker. Like if you walk away from that session being like, what the fuck just happened? Like, I'm not going to do this again. I'm suddenly busy every Wednesday from here until the end of time, that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like that makes it a lot easier and allows us to kind of talk about it in a much more positive light. But there's kind of one thing that I was curious about if we flip the switch a little bit, is that if I'm going to say like critiques I have of Pathfinder, I mean, there's a lot to juggle. I mean, it like you have to, I mean, as a person who is just trying to get through it, you have to imagine that if you don't have anybody that's kind of the mentor in this relationship who has a firm understanding of Pathfinder and like knows how to play it and has been them that's taught themselves by their, the Sith Lord that is, one student, one master kind of thing. You're going to be rough as you're kind of flipping through pages. And that's something that we did have happen, is that even though I read through the rules and I obviously didn't memorize every condition, every attack and everything like that. And there were pauses in that I think a more proficient group wouldn't have had. And I think it would have made it much smoother. But as a first time player, I was like, oh no, what page is that? Oh gosh, I gotta get through this. So, I mean, it is not first time game friendly. And if you are playing it for the first time, you have to be pretty generous to yourself as to the outcome. And don't be discouraged if you have a game that doesn't turn out well. If you've never played a role playing game, this could be a really tough first game for you and your group of friends to get around.
Yeah, the more rules there are, I mean, the clunkier it's going to be when you first pick it up, even if you have a background playing, other games or other rule sets. I know that I had a couple of questions. I know that I slowed the game down a couple of times because there were things that I just didn't know. And I know I looked some stuff up while stuff, continued on, because we're pretty good at going with the flow sometimes, like going, let's rule it like this, and if somebody can find out the way that it really is, we'll change it moving forward. As a group, I think we all take that pretty well. Sometimes it works out in your favor, sometimes it doesn't work out in your favor, but that's okay. But yeah, it would be a rough game if you were picking this up for the first time. Like if you and three of your friends were like, I'm going to play a tabletop role-playing game, and everybody tells me Pathfinder's amazing. Seems like a good game. Seems like a really good game. I don't know if I would want to play it as my first time. I know that when I was a kid and, playing Dungeons and Dragons with my classmates, we had a hell of a lot of fun, but we mangled the rules. Not intentionally, but we did, because we, just didn't know enough. Yeah, but you can still have fun.
Yeah, it's true.
I would always default to that, is if you find a rule, if you're not sure, have the GM rule and then move on, and then you can check it later. That's what I always kind of say. Unless you think it's going to ruin something, and then sure, take the time. And I think you did a great job. I would say the one thing that I can see being interesting about the game is the more complex the rules are, like for me as a player, it's more fun, but I could see it being difficult for a GM. I could see it being a lot of like prep time within the GM sphere of what you need to do to prepare for a game where you're both, making monsters, making the adventure, making traps, deciding skill checks. Like I can see like what I realized in playing Pathfinder is what I love as a player might be one of the things that would challenge me it challenges me the most as a GM is that I like a lot of stuff that can go on and a lot of options and a lot of actions, but taking care of that in the GM side is very difficult.
Yeah.
So I commend you.
I truthfully think that like, it would be not my favorite GM advice to say like, okay, you need to know everything about the system and settings your first time out. Like that would be, I think familiarizing yourself is different than memorizing. And that's kind of what I try to do is familiarize. So it was, like I said, it was a little bit rough around the edges, but like when you said, oh, I isn't there a way I can use medicine to heal myself? And my brain was like, does not compute. It did not remember that skill option at all. Like it just wasn't even in the brain pan. And so, I mean, but that was a quick thing to look up and be like, oh yeah, well that's perfect. But now guess what? I'm not going to forget that moving forward. So in future instances, it's going to be much smoother and everything like that. So as complex the system is, it definitely like, and it's hard because this isn't our first RPG. So we obviously have enough sense and knowledge about how games like this run that if when you say we make a ruling on the spot, it's backed up by 20 plus years of gut check, so it's not going to be like a ruling that is typically broken, but it could be like when we're looking for the flat-footed rule, it was like, yeah, I thought it had something in there, but I just can't seem to find it. Yeah, you call them flat-footed, but I didn't remember the -2 AC.
Right.
That isn't going to break your game, right? And if that happens to be the one time you give a flat-footed advantage when you shouldn't, okay, oh, whoops, like you got it this time. Now we all agree that, going forward, you have to hit this scenario to make it flat-footed again, I mean, that just those little things, but like, I don't know if a first time person is going to have that same judgment, because they'll run into a situation and they'll be like, oh gosh. And then the anxiety will go through the roof to make the perfect call. Just ain't gonna happen.
Well, I encourage people not to try and make a perfect call. Just do what's fun. But one thing I will say is, just do what's fun. Like, I think one of the things about role playing, to get back to Jeff's point about when they were kids and mangling rules, is like the main thing that you're doing anytime you're role playing is you're playing pretend with your friends. So do what's cool and what's fun. If it's something that you want to fix later, you can fix it later, or you can just house rule it on the spot. But the one thing I would say is one of the things that was that I think is interesting is even in this conversation, one of the things that Pathfinder has done that like D&D doesn't do is the 3 attacks and the modifiers. And we've already memorized that quick math in our head. So like the more you use the rules, the more you look at them, the easier that stuff gets. So I would encourage nobody, if you do pick up a game, just keep at it, because you'll start remembering things a lot more than you want or think you should. So unless it's Shadowrun is going to have rules that you will never remember or enjoy.
Well, specifically Shadowrun 6th edition. Like, I think there were a couple editions that had some fun sprinkled in there, but I think it was 6th edition that we played that we absolutely were just like, why are we beating our head against the wall? Let's just move on.
That was the last Shadowrun game that I ran where it was like, wait, strength doesn't do anything to make you hit things harder?
Nope. Did you have something, Jeff? I thought you had a comment you wanted in there.
I think Brent covered most of it. It's important to remember that you're playing a game and that you should have fun. And I even think that it's okay that if the group, including the game master, feels like that doesn't make any sense to me, or just flat out it's stupid and we don't want to do that, nothing says that you have to follow all of the rules. I think most of us want to try to, because the rule set was designed with an end goal, I'm assuming, of an enjoyable game session or series of game sessions. But, you know, if you don't want to count absolutely every arrow or sling bullet, you know, after every encounter, and make sure that the GM knows that you spent 15 minutes thoroughly searching so that you recovered everything that was recoverable, you got to do what's fun. And sometimes following all the rules isn't fun. So I'll probably get some hate mail for that if anybody's listening.
Hopefully you do get hate mail. I will say the funniest thing about that is the thing that I don't think I have never been in a gaming group that uses components for casting spells. Like, because you're technically supposed to track those just like ammo, and I've never been in a gaming group that does it, ever. Like, I've never been in a gaming group where the GM suddenly goes, how much bat guano you got in your pocket for that fireball spell? Like, I've never been in the group that tracked bat shit or anything of that nature. And so it's one of those funny rules that I just think it's kind of funny.
Well, there is one caveat. I've never been in a group that has tracked low-level spell components. The thing where you're like, you need a diamond at least of 10,000 gold worth, you know, like those spells tend to all of a sudden perk up on the DM's ears and be like, do you have that 10,000 gold diamond?
Well, that's situational, though, because sometimes that fireball spell is the most important goddamn thing that's going to happen in the next round of combat.
That's true. And I still love how there was that flaming skull in Phandelver that's just like, ooh, PCs. Fireball. Like that was like my favorite thing ever.
And it got to it, and it hit us like twice before we figured it out.
Yes, it
was at least twice.
It almost party wiped us twice for sure. And then I think the third time was when we finally were like, I don't know, put it in the sack or whatever. And we like kept it for some reason.
It was pretty funny. I'm not gonna lie.
To use on somebody else.
We throw this flaming skull into somebody else's problem. Yeah, so I guess in general, I think if I were to say, is Pathfinder, you know, beginner friendly, I wouldn't say it's necessarily beginner friendly, but I do see that, you know, if it's a good system. It's solid so far based on what we've played. Now, because we did like the system as much as we did, we are going to be putting together a Pathfinder campaign for our group. So that the first session that we did was kind of just a wet your whistle kind of thing to make sure the rules we didn't hate the rules. Like we didn't all of a sudden get minimalist in our desire for what rules that we wanted. But yeah, so we didn't hate the rules. We liked it. It seems like it's going to be a lot of fun. And so we're going to do, you know, all the gaming prep and all that. And so in a couple of weeks, we're actually going to get a Pathfinder campaign started. But to talk a little bit more about the actual adventure that we ran here, I did think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about like theory crafting for DMs and stuff in terms of how to build an easy adventure. Because I'm going to say it again. This was probably one of the most concise, well-targeted 2-hour adventures that I think I've run. It was a little bit basic. And that was just because I didn't want to like go too deep into everything like that and make it too long, because we could have made this 2 or 3 sessions just because of how our group operates. But I think this would be a good time to talk about the 5-room dungeon. Now, you both mentioned that you knew a little bit about it, or I think maybe Brent, you had mentioned you've heard of it. Jeff, you had not heard of it. But in terms of just like what this theory is that it's a series of events, and they call it the 5-room dungeon because typically what it is it's 5 dungeon rooms. And for all intents and purposes, you could literally make just entrance, you know, entrance, next room, next room, next room, next room, all the way until the reward at the end. It could just literally be a series of rooms. And I think in terms of like something that people might have actually seen a live example of this being built is I think it's very reminiscent. And the first thing that kind of I thought it was like the Dalian Tomb or whatever it is from Matt Colville, where he kind of like builds that small adventure where it's just, you know, you kind of go on, and it's not very long, and it doesn't have to be long, but it's concise. It has a purpose. It makes sense. And these steps are actually pretty fun. You don't have to go in order. But I thought it worked out pretty well for this adventure. Now, I think Brett, you'd heard about the 5-room dungeon. I guess, what did you hear about the 5-room dungeon and kind of from your perspective?
I've just done some research on different formulas for scenario development. If you're going to homebrew your own sort of game or adventure. So I had heard of it. It wasn't one of the ones that I think I read. And frankly, I don't remember the names of many of the ones I read, but I did read a few short articles on just development, adventure development. And I remember that was one of the templates that people were pretty happy with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So I think that if I'm going to be selling this, I want to first of all say I don't actually know where the concept of the 5-room dungeon originated. So if there is an original author or something out that needs to be credited, I would of course mention that later. But the idea is that you just have a very concise series of events that can take place anywhere. It's usually fairly short, quick to plan, quick to run, and it's pretty easy that you could polish. And I could see if I reran this scenario again with a different group of players, I have about 6 places that I took note of that I could easily polish that to make it a lot better. Now, the actual process for the dungeon is super simple. The first one is going to be basically like an entrance and a guardian, and you guys saw that reflected in the fact that you literally had a door with 2 automatons. The second one is a puzzle or role-playing challenge. And you guys saw that in the fact that the security door had a 4-gem puzzle that needed to be solved in order to pass through. The third one is a trick or a setback. Now, that one I didn't really have a great trick or setback, other than I split the remaining gems in the other 2 rooms that you had to find. And then, of course, room 4 technically is your big battle or climax, which was the arena sparring bot, the automaton there. And then the revelation, plot twist, reward, of course, was clearing all the hazards of this workshop and making it so that, at least in this case, it feels like the one person that benefited this most was another one of our players. He was an alchemist, and so he kind of walked away with all giddy and happy with some of the stuff that he doesn't know what it is, but that was the big reward for him. And of course, you got a few, incidental things, gems, rings, etc. So. But that's a 5-room dungeon in a nutshell. And you could put that anywhere. You could make that into a mage's tower. You could make that into whatever you want to do. You could even mix and match. You don't have to have it exactly as I outlined it based on kind of the traditional formula. It would probably not be good to put the reward first, because then what's the point of doing the other ones? But you could you don't have to start off with a battle. You could start with the puzzle, put a battle later. You know what I'm saying? And you don't have to have a big boss battle. You're just going to have a conflict of some sort that has to be resolved. So I like it. What do you guys think now that you've kind of played through your first 5-room dungeon?
I thought it was a really neat storytelling technique. I did some half-assed internet research, though, while you were talking. And it looks like the original 5-room dungeon was published back in 2006. It's a GM prep and writing technique developed by John Four at Role Playing Tips.
Sweet.
So
John Four.
I think John deserves all the credit, because it is a clever approach, especially to keep things concise, and it does hit on all of the things that I think we have come to expect from an adventure like that. I don't know if it's movies or books that have kind of driven that structure into our heads, but it's very satisfying. And just listening to you, it sounds like the concept helps you create the whole setup so that it's easier on you and better for us. And I thought it was really successful.
Yeah. It does have a time and a place, just like a lot of these different adventure, the theories and everything like that it has. Like, I think that since we were running a one-shot and we specifically wanted to do the Pathfinder component, the time and the place for this 5-room dungeon was perfect. And so I think that the ability for it to kind of be reflective of what I wanted to, and obviously we didn't go through some of that, well, you guys all meet in a tavern and you guys are given a job and kind of go through all that preamble to get to the dungeon. You guys just kind of started in the action. And I think that also helps, kind of kick it off on the right foot.
For a one-shot or a con game, like, this was a perfect example, I think, of a game that you could run at a convention, because it was short, it was concise, It was well thought out. It didn't have that like beginning part, because that's what you kind of want from a one shot or a con game, is you really kind of want introduction to mechanics, I think. And I think this was a great example of that. I would think that if you use this over and over, like you were with the same group every week, like it would get repetitive, I would think, unless you've mastered the technique and can mix it up quite a bit. But I think for like the one shot, it was great.
Yeah. No, and that's the meta of it. I mean, it's kind of like right now, if you pull back the curtain, and as a player, if you know that your GM has designed like these really fun little dungeons that you do, and all of a sudden you start thinking about it, you're like, oh shit, that's the secret sauce. That could of course be a little bit detrimental to your gameplay, but I don't plan on using this, like weekly basis. But I do think it helps you design simple dungeons, or it helps you design a simple adventure, so that for us, if we dare publish some of the stuff that we run through from our gaming groups and stuff like that, especially from a one shot. I personally like having something that where we go in and we literally put the system through a pace. And in this case, these 5-room dungeon type scenarios are a perfect example of how you can really test a system, because you can include what you feel is important for the system to do. And you're not, I say 5-room dungeon, but could be anything. It could be you get to a village and you have a sequence of 5 events to get through before you get to the end, kind of thing. So
it's your outdoor dungeon. One thing I will say to I think the point that Jeff made earlier is like, it is satisfying, because sometimes those tropes, like the puzzle, the fight, like those tropes they're there for a reason. It's because they're entertaining. And while they might get old, like I said, anything gets old after a while, but like they work. And I think it worked great in this situation. So yeah.
So in this case, as Jeff had said, Jeff will have to say it again, but there is a person who put this out, John
Four
FOUR at Role Playing Tips.
Role Playing Tips.
High five to him if possible. Just because, I mean, honestly, it's always nice when somebody puts together something that's like simple and easy to master, so that you can just put another tool in your tool belt and all that kind of stuff. So with that, I think we can go ahead and say that our part 1 is done. So at this point, we're going to kind of kick it over to our second update. Just kind of playing with new gamers. This is going to kind of reflect a little bit of the experience that I had playing a first time game with my wife. And some of the things that I think, can be good or bad about playing with first time folks. And I think that, we've all kind of experienced first time gamer syndrome. I don't know if that's a syndrome. I don't know if that's the right word, but the first time it can be a precarious thing, because at least in my experience, one of the things that I have is that, my wife has known about my hobby for the better part of 15 years, but she hasn't played in it, because she's like, okay, that's your hobby. Just like quilting is my hobby. We kind of have separate hobbies that we pursue. And so she wasn't, she was just kind of like leaving it so that we were doing our separate things. But, she decided to stick one toe in the water. And there was this thing in the back of my mind that was like, I don't want to fuck this up, because I don't want to, first of all, make her think that, A, I'm an incompetent dungeon master and you guys have no idea. She has no idea what you guys see in me. Boy, that would have been ego shattering. And second, I didn't want her to think that the games we play are just stupid contrivances that she's like, what do you guys see in this? It's just so dumb. Like, I didn't want those two outcomes to happen.
You were worried of you bunch of fucking nerds. That's what you were worried about.
I was so worried about that outcome. Like, if she would have walked away from this and she was just like, you guys are fucking morons. Why do you guys do this every week? Like, why do you torture yourself? I would rather you get a better hobby. You should stop this right now. Like, I don't think that would have necessarily been the trick. But in this case, it was just a 2-person game that we played. And as I think we described last week, I played the game Risus with her. And there was an actual choice in this. And this is where I think the first tip comes in, is that if you are introducing a person to a new game, it really depends on the situation. If you're doing a one-on-one like I was, I think that's really good because it provides you a different type of outlet when you do a duet game. And it's nice because in this case, we got to choose whatever system I felt was good to do the introduction. And knowing my wife, if I would have hit her with the 5e or the Pathfinder, man, she'd have been like, don't care. Too many rules, brain not work. I mean, not that she's not a smart lady, but she just isn't necessarily interested to stick her toe into a game that has several thousand pages of rules to get through. But that's why we chose Rices, is because Rices is a minimalist game that has 4 pages, according, the one that I was able to find. And it was 4 pages, easy. Conflict resolution had 3 different types of conflict that you really encountered. It uses cliches, which are really relatable, and it just made it so much easier for her to kind of step into it without having to necessarily get steeped in lore, mechanics, etc., etc., etc. So know your audience is my first tip, and in this case, know if they want to play that really complicated game. What about you guys? What kind of first-timer tips do you guys have for somebody who's never touched a tabletop RPG? And I think I might direct this more at Jeff, because you've got your significant other that is kind of also dipping her toe into the waters here. Might be able to convert her.
Specific to that example, I think that you want to find something that engages the new person. Even if you play Pathfinder all the time with your group of friends and you love it and you rave about it, if the person you're trying to get into the hobby doesn't care about dungeon crawling or saving kingdoms or fighting fantastical beasts and killing them and taking everything that they've hoarded, you're never going to pull them in. You've got to find a system, preferably that's a little lighter on the rules to simplify things, but something that speaks to them. It could be as simple as the art style in the book. I took some suggestions from you guys when I was talking with Jessica, and said, "Hey, here's some things you can check out. You wanted to play, one of these games, and so here's some things to look at." And she started looking, and she started doing a little research, and she's like, "I like this one." And it's like, great, we need to set aside some time to play that, because it helps when the person you're trying to get in hooks themselves, because there is going to be a little bit of frustration. It's something new. They're not going to be perfect at it. Not that they have to be perfect, but they haven't done it before. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And if they can bring some enthusiasm and some excitement to the table, that's going to help get past those small bumps in the road to that shared experience that I think is the thing that is one of the things that we all treasure when we get to play that. It's not my character doing something. It's all of our characters accomplishing something. And so my big tip would be to find something that engages the new person. Listen to them, ask them questions, let them look at things and give them a choice. It's also less scary if they're not the only one learning a new system at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's way less intimidating when everybody's on a level playing field.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, is I think find out what interests them and what kind of story that they want to tell. And it's going to be a little hard. And sometimes it's hard at first. I haven't done it in a long time, but I have helped new people in role-playing before. But I think that's the hardest part, is sometimes they're not going to know, like, well, I don't know what type of story. Like, so just kind of ask them, like, I don't know what I want to do. It's that old thing. Well, if you could do anything, what's the first thing you would do? And they most often the answer is, I don't know, because there's too many options. So it's always good to pare it down and just ask questions and to kind of get to something small that you can handle. If it is the, kill the orc, take the cake, one dungeon, most complete game ever sort of thing. Find out what they like. And then the other thing that I suggest always is encourage the choices that they make. Because one of the things that's always going to be hardest, I think, for people is if you get into a role playing session, especially with other people, where you are actually role playing or an in character and something like that, like people are talking in character or things like that, always make sure you encourage that and don't ever make them feel uncomfortable with it, because that's one of the hardest parts for our hobby, right? Are those moments where you become an improv comedian and you need to improv a scene or talk in voices, try and talk through a scene as a character. That's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people suggest the game Fiasco as like a starter game, and that's one of the ones that I always express as being super hard because it's all improv comedy.
Mm-hmm.
You played Fiasco with me and a couple other people, Jeff. Do you remember that?
I do a little bit, and I'm not someone who considers myself a natural role player. Probably better than I think I am. But I'm not, I don't do tons of voices, and I don't get super dramatic and theatrical, with my movements and stuff. Not that everybody does, but some people do and make it seem like the funnest thing in the world. But I got into Fiasco. It took a little bit, but it was a lot of fun. Once I let go of the BS in my head, the things that were holding me back, then I was like, I can just do these things. Like, I can just say that this is what I want to do. It was kind of neat, but I was a little intimidated.
Yeah, but it always surprises me that people are like, well, this is an easy game for new people. And it's like, I think you're wrong, because sure, there's no rules, but you're putting a spotlight on somebody to be like, hey, act like Judy in the diner during this robbery. Go. And like, some people are really going to struggle with that. So it's important to really support that and try and be on the same level and help those when they're in character. I think, like anything, like you have to be supportive of somebody who's doing something brand new.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting because one of the comments that she made is she's like, I don't have any biases, but that also means I don't know what to do. So she felt like, she's like, well, what do I do? Like, so I was like, you enter into a room. This is the description of the room. And she's just like, okay. And I'm like, okay, well, typically, when you're in this kind of situation, you will basically, I'm going to set the scene. I'm going to paint you the picture as much as I feel is necessary for your character to have an impression of what's happening, what they see, what they smell, what they hear. All those different senses can be tickled in some way or anything like that. And then, it's up to you to ask questions that you feel are necessary to complete your picture of a particular scene or a situation. And then you just tell us what you want to do. And then she was like, well, what do you mean tell you what you want to do? I was like, well, if you see a set of stairs, you have to tell me you want to go up those stairs. I'm not going to just, I mean, sometimes you could kind of like skip that part, but if there's other things happening in the room, you don't want to just be like, okay, well, you see this room, it has all these really interesting clues, and you see a set of stairs, which you immediately head up. That's like not how that's supposed to play. So it's like you kind of have to remind them that, even the most mundane things, you as the character get to decide how this all plays out. So once I'm done describing the scene, you just say what you want to do. And if it's an action that doesn't make sense, I can explain why that action may not make sense and try to interpret what they're trying to do in a way that either is reflective of the rules or whatever system we're trying to use, how that can be interpreted and all that kind of stuff.
And it's only experienced gamers that are going to make the dumbest decision ever. I'm going to go and I'm going to stand in the corner for 15 minutes and wait for somebody else to come in the room.
It might be.
I hadn't really thought of it until you said it, because I think that I kind of always understood some of what I was supposed to do, and maybe it was the books I read, or maybe it was the way my brain processed seeing things like movies. But you very seldom go into a room when there's a goal that you're trying to accomplish, right? There's some overarching goal, and not assume that something in that room may help you. It may not, but if you don't look, you don't know. And it just kind of tickled my brain when you said that your wife was just like, well, I'm not sure what to do. And this isn't in any way a negative thing. It's just I hadn't considered that, and I would have been a horrible dungeon master or game master for her.
It's funny because and it's bringing back some memories. Like that's the experience I remember. It's that given a situation where you can do anything, like, and that's what you're saying. Well, you can do anything you want in the room. Like you're asking them to think about something that as a human being, when we walk into a room, we don't stop and think about it. Like we don't stop and say, okay, I'm in the living room. What am I doing now? And so like to have that moment is hard for somebody who hasn't had that moment before. So and it's funny because I usually find that's the analysis paralysis of that moment where it's like, this is your character. You can do anything you want is usually something that I see new players struggle with. And it is hard to kind of direct them. So I think that's really good that you could do that because it's like, well, you can do anything. And then sometimes they freeze because they're like, well, I don't want to mess it. Okay, I just leave. Okay, story's over. Like, but I think one of the things that helped me with that is I think that's the type of books that we did, like fantasy books and stuff like that, I think help. I played like King's Quest and adventure games when I was younger. I think that sort of thing helped. And I think it's just, yeah, it is different. It is. I remember I was playing with somebody who was new once, and this is when we were older. And I remember he asked if he could, like I said, well, there's like 5 guards, and your group is sneaking up on them. What do you want to do? And he's like, well, can I pull one of the guards away? Can I pull one of the guards? That's what he said. Which for anybody who hasn't played an MMO, a pull is when you aggro one mob and pull it off from the group. It's very specific to like a computer game. And I was like, well, yeah, but you got to kind of treat it like they're people. Like if they see him walk off because he's got an arrow in him, like it's going to be a big deal. And so it was kind of like explaining to him the difference between, it's not like a video game. It's more an interpretive story. But it was one of those things that I didn't think about. Like that frame of reference for me hadn't been present before. So it was like, well, technically, yes, but it's not like he's going to just robotically come to you like World of Warcraft.
You can't just taunt that one mob, let's just say.
Right. Like you can't throw a rock and bounce it off his head and he'd be the only one that comes. Like he might call his friends. And then kind of saying like, well, if you were in a situation and you were surrounded by 4 friends and somebody hit you with a rock, would you just walk off or would you say, hey guys, somebody just hit me with a rock? And like kind of like setting that sort of situation. So it is always interesting when there's just a different frame of reference than what you're used to. So I think that's cool. It's a cool observation.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, honestly. Like, and she likes sci-fi and fantasy movies and stuff, but so she definitely has the imagination, to kind of proceed. And when she started like getting the hang of it, she started understanding. And this specific adventure, and I can't really divulge anything because I'm probably going to be running it again shortly. Is that and this is something that I think that we're guilty of, but it's also important to do, is there's the payoff and there's the hints and there's the reward for paying attention. And I feel like, if you're not careful and the adventure is really basic, like the reward for paying attention is nothing. And I don't know. I feel like if you can get situations where you can even call back even in that same adventure to something earlier and you go, aha, I'm the person who pieced that together. Man, there were some payoff moments in this adventure for her that she was just like, you could tell there was a little bit of glitter there. And I was like, haha, I'm not a terrible person and I haven't just misinterpreted my entire career as a role player. Like, because it was the same kind of thing that we experience, when we have those moments and we like, we like have that wavelength with the DM and we're like, that puzzle, cake, because I remember 2 sessions ago you said this, and this. Done. Bop, 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 bop. And you're done. So.
Now, it's really good to get to know your audience. It's like introducing anybody to anything new. You kind of have to understand their frame of reference. When my kids were younger, they wanted to play D&D. They knew that Dad played D&D. They knew that Dad owned a store that sold D&D stuff. And we played, and they had a lot of fun. But every time somebody died, in the middle of combat, my youngest son was, I loot the body. And I tried to explain why that might be a bad idea. And it was really confusing to him because he grew up playing video games. His frame of reference was video games. And if you don't loot the body now, the loot may not be there if you ever even come back to this area. And so I was like, I realized that I was actually dampening his fun by trying to run the game by the rules. And so I said, here's what you find. And the kids loved it. They just loved looting the bodies as soon as they hit the floor, regardless of how much of the horde was still left. And that's how you grab people, right? You find ways to connect with them. You find ways to make it meaningful for them. And if it ruins your little worldview for 5 minutes, it's probably not the end of the world.
Yeah, I agree. Always be permissive. It's like one of the things that I talked with another GM friend of mine once was we were talking about the death rules in I think it was D&D at the time, right? The death rules in D&D are if you go down and your character's helpless, but they're not dead yet. And so one of the things that came up in a session, and this might have been with a new player, I don't know, was they said, well, how come the guy doesn't just stab the guy that's on the ground? And it's like...
It's logical.
Well,
it's logical. That's all I'm saying.
Exactly. It's like, well, because, like, and that's the thing, is like, another guy is like, how come your bad guys never run away? Like, how come if you drop the first two of them, how come the other four don't ever just run away? And it's like, so the other thing I encourage is remember those little things, and always, if somebody gives you that feedback, like, try and work it in. So I think that's good. Yeah.
Well, but one comment on that is that, if you're playing with somebody especially new, sometimes it doesn't hurt to make the enemies a little dumb, because I have to say I did play with one of those GMs that
no.
That kills you is like as soon as your body touches the floor and you're unconscious, they're like stab it in the neck kind of thing.
I would never continue playing with anybody that was like, I ignore the rest of the party to stab the guy that's on the ground. Because like we all know that's like definite like feels badsy sort of things. It's like there's a lot going on. Are they really going to pay attention to the guy that's not a threat anymore? And then the GM's like, I want to make sure they're a threat never again. Like, that's not okay. Like, that's not good storytelling. That's edging towards vindictive.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, but there were some situations in which a lot of us perished at the, like we run into a situation and like, and they had the tactical advantage or whatever it is, but all of a sudden they're just like, and they go around poking you until you're dead. Coup de grace. And I'm like, I've never heard that term used so many times in a single combat. Uh-oh.
Well, it's a bad sign when it starts to feel confrontational. Mm-hmm. When it feels like somebody at the table is taking it personally. It can happen inter-party. It doesn't have to be GM against party or individual character in a party. I've seen that a couple of times where it's just this one person that's getting under somebody's skin. Somebody's expectations are different from the rest of the group. And I think maybe not in the middle of the session, but maybe at the end of the session or before the next session, trying to level set again and understand what everybody's hoping to get out of this, because what it should be is a fun time for everyone. Maybe not the same level of fun. That would be really hard to accomplish. But it shouldn't feel like this one person is really just trying to kill this other person in the party. Like why would you continue to show up week after week or several times a week if you hated being there? I don't get it. But somebody should say something, and there should be some communication going on, and get that stuff out of here. That just doesn't belong. I got too much shit to do in my life. I can't have a commitment that's uncomfortable.
I think, I think one of the things that, and this might be a subject for a later episode, is sort of like, as the GM, as much as sometimes that it's fun to say stuff like, the players really got away from me or whatever, it isn't the GM versus the players. And it's rough if you have a GM that takes it that way. Those are hard games. I've been in games where that was the case. And the simple fact is the GM has the win button. Like they can decide all this, everything that goes on in the situation. So it's pointless. But and that's where we can talk a little bit about social contract and making those decisions and talking through games. But yeah, like it's important to remember, like the game is meant to be fun for new players and experienced players. So you need to level set and remember that that's what it's for. And there are games where the point is to kill the other players. Like if you're playing Paranoia,
Sure,
you're killing each other in a fun way, hopefully. So unless it's that sort of game.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. But again, that's back to Jeff and the expectations. If you go in and you expect a very fun collaborative team game, and then you have Stabby McStabberson stabbing everybody in the back while they sleep, that's less fun. But if you have a game where you're like, ooh, one of you is not like the others, what's going to happen? And you can kind of create a little bit of fun and intrigue. But if everyone understands what they're going into, that could be an entirely different game. So I think in terms of like other first time either GM or player tips or anything like that you guys may have, do you have anything else that we would want to let anybody know? And of course, if anybody's listening and they have their own first timer tips, like you've never played a game or you had somebody that experienced this, what did you do that worked really well? What did you do that didn't work well? Or what have you heard that just made a game experience shit and you basically turned somebody off to one of the most amazing hobbies you can have? So
yeah, we'd like to see any comments that you have on that. I think everybody should keep an open mind, and I know we've said this several times in the episode, but remember to have fun. Let go of some of your preconceived notions. This is a slightly different type of game. If you've never played a role-playing game, it's a different kind of game than you've probably ever played before. And be ready to learn, be willing to ask questions, and try to make it fun.
Like I always kind of say, or at least in my internal dialogue, I don't know if I've said it to everybody, but it's playing pretend with your friends. And if you enjoyed it when you were a kid, you can enjoy it when you're an adult. There's just a few more dice involved, maybe, and maybe some bad luck if you're me. But that's the thing, is like, make it fun. Make it that if you can for a moment capture that kind of feeling where you're a kid and you're just playing pretend with your friends and like nothing else matters in that moment, like that's kind of what you're shooting for. And you can capture those moments. And if you can prove that to somebody new, like that's fantastic. So please, if you have, let us know. Comment, send us a message, comment on Twitter, send us comment on YouTube. Let us know. We'd like to talk to you guys about it. Anybody out there? So yeah.
So with that, I think that's actually our time this week. We hope that you enjoyed our fireside chat about Pathfinder, what we liked about it, what we may feel might be some challenges, as well as some of the stuff that we experienced from a new player perspective. But we will continue to share our stories. So if you have any stories to share with us and you want to get the word out, let us know. We're happy to read them and either give our 2 cents or, I guess, commiserate. We've been in a lot of these situations ourselves, so we maybe not all of them RPG horror stories, I guess, but whatever. But yeah, Jeff, do you want to let them know where they can find us, and then we'll sign off?
Yeah, if you'd like to get a hold of us, it is Rollwise on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And if you'd like to email us, it's rollwiseguys@gmail.com. And if you get a chance and you liked our content, give us a like, maybe subscribe. We got more content like this, and we're always happy to take ideas.
As always, thank you everybody for listening. We always appreciate if you stayed with us for this long. And remember, always roll well and roll wise. And see.